One Warriors. All right, welcome Warriors. My name is Coach JV, your top health and mindset coach in the world. Remember, what you believe in your heart, you think in your mind, will eventually become your words and become your reality. If you can see it in your mind, eventually you can hold it right here in your hands. What you repeatedly do gets ingrained in your subconscious mind. What gets ingrained in your subconscious mind becomes an unconscious activity. And today is a huge honor. Here at the Warrior Academy, we're always working to educate people and share with you what's happening in the new financial world, right? We haven't had a new asset class since the 1600s, and things are changing rapidly. And we're very honored to have Philip Pieper, first from Swarm Market, the first licensed DeFi protocol. So I know there's been a lot of information coming to you guys at a very rapid pace. We want to bring Philip on to help us understand, first of all, what does it mean to be the first licensed DeFi protocol and where we're heading in this space. So Philip, how you doing? Introduce yourself to the Warrior team.
Well, thanks for having me, Coach and Salman. Yeah, my name is Philip Pieper. I've been, an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur for quite some time. Before then, I was in the financial industry. I was working for Deutsche Bank and for Allianz. And after founding a couple of startups in Silicon Valley, made it into the blockchain space randomly in 2017, and was partly initiator of a project called Swarm Network, which is the issuance side of this equation that we're going to be discussing, which is effectively how to build compliant token infrastructure, how to make that as cheap and open as possible and let people benefit from that. And since 2 years, we've been actually sort of working on this project called Swarm Markets, which is sort of an overnight success, 2 years in the making. But we'll talk about how much work that takes. It's quite a journey.
Yeah, you say overnight success. That's something that people see that, right? All of a sudden, you're the first licensed DeFi protocol. So tell us about that journey. How did you get to be the first licensed DeFi protocol? How difficult was that, and what did that journey look like?
Well, so we always, obviously coming from the issuance side, we always had to find the value proposition to people saying, okay, why do you tokenize? And that's an easier question than the answer to that, because the answer is more nuanced. It's like, to digitize an asset as a real world asset, that sounds great because it gives you a lot of flexibility, it gives you a lot of control, it gives you transparency and everything that we know that the space wants. The problem is that, it boils down to people wanting liquidity. And that is not as easy as it seemed from the beginning on. So when we started off in 2017, we thought that a lot of other players would just come along, and we were rooting for T0 and Open Finance and other people to just be able to do that. And the reality was that it took exorbitant amount of legal fees for those companies to actually sort of spend on projects that in the end may not be as differentiated and may not leverage the blockchain to the fullest extent, right? So when we were seeing that kind of issue by talking with issuers, we said, okay, we got to solve this somehow. And then something coincidentally happened in Europe, which regulators took a much more forward-leaning stance than the United States on this. And we're sort of dabbling around in the smaller jurisdictions, which are mostly faster. But then suddenly Germany came along, and Germany actually took a very, very forward-leaning stance, in 2019, that then actually amended the Banking Act in 2020. So with that, we knew that there was a huge basis to do certain things. And we then actually saw in 2020, we saw coming alongside this whole concept of network liquidity with Uniswap and Balancer and others actually paving the way, which is revolutionary in itself. But then being able to merge those two things was, for us, the obvious idea, but it was also easier said than done, because actually sort of trying to convince a regulator of the fact that that's something that, that is the new operational modus. That's obviously a big challenge in itself, but it was quite an interesting journey with a lot of help by people that made us actually work through it. And the regulator on the other end was actually very, very open to this.
That's really interesting. So going through it, so share with me too, like what's the difference between Swarm Networks and Swarm's Market? So I know when people research Swarm Network comes up, what's the difference between the two?
So one is issuance. So Swarm Network is the issuance side. So when you want to tokenize a asset, which means that you basically build a digital twin, you need two components mainly. One component is the regulatory and legal side. So how to tie what eventually becomes a digital asset, how to tie that to the real thing. And that can be a stock table, it can be a real asset, it can be something, it can be a classic car for that matter, right? And then that's really undefined, and it's left to sort of creativity to find that out. But then on the other hand, you need technology to make that happen. So we at Swarm Markets built, on the conviction that that should be as cheap and as replicatable and as, leverageable as possible, by still being able to control what that means, because there's a lot of regulation that goes into the fact that you tokenize something. And so we built, smart contracts that are able to do that cheaply. We built sort of, onboarding procedures that people can use freely. We built sort of fundraising methodologies that people can configure by themselves and then use. But at the end of that process, there is something that is digitized that represents something that is offline, that is a real world asset of some kind. Now, Swarm Markets, on the other hand, is basically how to turn that digitized asset and more, because it's not just limited to security tokens, into something that can be traded. And there's a lot of complexities around that topic, because regulatory bodies, rightly so, look at these markets and try to ensure that there's neutrality, that there's a fairness for all market participants, and that there's a control of actually how these trades happen. And there's much, much more regulation coming down the pike, with the fat of travel rule and other things that actually make it incredibly difficult to solve that piece of the equation. But it's like yin and yang. You can't do one without the other. You actually have to do both together to actually make this whole category succeed. And I think it's not the end, but it's a beginning of a very incredibly interesting journey, because I think it's actually giving us a lot of grounds to cut through the Gordian knot of what the difficulty was so far in this industry.
Yeah, one of the things too that comes up a lot, right, with the SEC lawsuit with Ripple, right? So it's like a lot of people get really confused, like, what is a security token? Like, what would be a security token versus a regular token? Because I think a lot of people are rushing into the space. You got a lot of the meme coins that are flooding people in. And so without understanding, people are investing in cryptocurrency. And then they're going back and forth about security, and people aren't really trying to understand. Can you help us understand, like, what is a security token versus a non-security token?
Well, first of all, the question is from what perspective, right? Because there's a lot of jurisdictions that define that differently, right? But I think when you look at the United States, there's this thing called the Howey test, which I think a lot of people have heard of, which basically defines what the characteristics of a security is, and it boils down to sort of that you invest money into a common enterprise that is then sort of, and basically the value creation happens by the work of others. Those are the three prongs of the Howey test, basically. And in the end, every investment product that you know of, whether it's like a financial product where you have a professional product manager on the other side that manages the money and does something with it, that is a financial product. That's a security for sure. If you have a stock table of a public company, it's the same thing. But even there's nuances when you actually have shared ownership of a car, and that car then gets maintained by someone else, but is an investment opportunity. It could be a security as well, but it's not always clear. So the difficulty lies not in the fact that it's a security, because in the end, we've now built a stack that actually is agnostic to the fact that it is a security. It just is a security, and you just have to sort of comply with regulation on the issuance side, as well as on the secondary liquidity side. But it's basically sort of replicating the standards that are built over decades in the financial markets, and basically building technology to be able to control that and to make that more efficient. So our goal is not to circumvent anything, quite to the contrary. We embrace what is there. We just hope to make it more efficient and to make it cheaper and much more, and cut the middleman for everyone involved, so that actually the pools can be operated by the participants, by the asset holders, which is revolutionary in itself.
One thing I was going to ask too, so just give people a better understanding. So for example, it says right here, it says anyone to build on top of a fully empowering the user the ability to create regulatory compliant digital assets. So for example, I own a Warrior Academy, right? So someone like me could come to a company like you and create a tokenized asset. Is that true? Is that how that works? How does that work? Like what? Because a lot of people get confused on why would a company like mine come to a company like yours?
Well, first of all, that first project, Swarm Network, is not a company. It's a DAO. So because it's open source, it has a community of people that actually sort of operate that and build applications on top of it. So, if you know that you have, you want to tokenize your academy, and actually the legal path on how to do that, then basically you can go to like an app that has been built on top of us called MySwarm app. You can just go there and configure your token, and without any coding skills, you can just deploy it. And that deployed token allows you to display the information that is connected with the token. It allows you to control who gets to interact with the token, because you may actually need to constrict that, or over time change those parameters to actually make that something that is more liquid, more tradable, and can be changed in terms of what the information is that you display with it. So our goal is actually to make it as easy as possible, that that people don't have to like spend a lot of time, but also a lot of money. So there's a lot of technology stacks out there that charge multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually make that all happen. And here's something where you don't have to do that. And by reducing that kind of barrier, we initially we have set out to actually build that creativity, to just take that out of the equation and make people do more tokenizations and actually be able to live with that creativity as a result of it.
That's beautiful. So like a comparison would be like in the past when I had to go to a company, it was monopolized, to build a website, right? I'd pay thousands of dollars for a website, but instead I could just go build my own website on Wix. Like I could go to Wix, build my own protocol there. Would that be a good example?
It's pretty much that way. Yeah, exactly. So you have your configuration options that Wix allows you to use. You have an extensibility because, and maybe it's more WordPress, because WordPress allows you more to actually go into the code and modify the code wherever you want to modify it. But it also has a hosted version. So the hosted version of WordPress allows you within minutes to just spin up something that, you then still pay like a monthly subscription fee, but it's there. It's fully controlled. It's curated. And I think you can think about it the same way on this side. It's like technology has become incredibly cheap. And what we tried to do like 4 years ago, today it's just a click away. It's no challenge whatsoever that comes alongside with it, right? But when technology gets out of the way, the fun starts, because you then can actually sort of just work on building the bridges into something that is valuable, where you have existing constituents of financial markets then that basically now see that no longer being an issue that prices it out of their considerations. So that way it's incredibly powerful when we get to that stage, and it's sort of an inflection point for adoption at that point.
I would like to ask a question to that. So I'm asking for companies that are really actually thinking of tokenizing their assets. So how would I be able to sell my tokens after that? Like, is there a certain platform, or like, can I do that on Swarm Markets, or would it be on also available on Uniswap or something? Like, is there some
yeah, so let's start with the two processes again. So issuance, right? So the primary issuance is already a process where you not just digitize the asset, but you then actually have an offering that sells the assets to a broader community of investors, so to third parties, right? The company does that, or you do that, and that primary issuance, that's part of the open source stack that Swarm Networks does. And there's procedures on how to do sort of fundraising, how to set up the fundraising, how to define soft caps and hard caps, how to do the distribution in the aftermath of raising the funds, etc. That's something that is for free, that you don't need to like really pay for. There's protocol fees, but that basically just goes into the protocol, right? What Swarm Markets is about is that, okay, once that has been created, so you might have actually, might have 10,000 investors that have come into your company, and the Warrior Academy is basically held by 10,000 people, of which a varying degree of shareholdings. The real value comes into play that when these people, based on what they know, based on the latest financials, or based on whatever perspective there exists, where they can build their own investment thesis and actually start to sell to each other, trade to each other, accumulate, sell off, depending on what their perspective is. And that secondary market was non-existent so far, and that had regulatory rules for it. And that was really, really hard to execute on. But it is basically what any kind of stock lives off of in the financial market. You don't issue a stock without actually building the market in the aftermath. And that was the sort of the missing gap that we're now filling, actually starting as of yesterday.
With the regulatory compliance, with the crackdown on unregulated exchanges, where does that put you in place in that? Is that familiar? Was that what you guys were working on, being the first licensed DeFi protocol? Is that?
So there's a lot of regulatory efforts that actually build centralized organizations in the crypto space, and that's great, and there's a high degree of confidence that comes into that, but it doesn't really leverage again blockchain and sharing economy to the fullest extent. So when we saw sort of what DeFi did to financial products by making them as transparent as possible, by preserving this thing called self-custody, where people hold the assets in their own wallets and they make their own decisions on what to do with those assets. And then this whole shared liquidity concept called network liquidity, where they go into pools together in Uniswap. They actually, as an asset holder, they not just build the markets, but actually they benefit from the fees flowing through the market. That's an incredible revolutionary concept for normally markets that are built by professionals, where you have to have a high degree of sophistication to do sort of build order books, how to do market making on those order books, etc. And now it's become almost dumbed down so that anyone who has a basic understanding can participate in these. And that's incredibly powerful, because suddenly the asset holders themselves become the institution. And that's basically sort of where a lot of people in the crypto space see the opportunity that the financial markets can become this trustless layer that allows people to transact whatever they feel they should transact on. And while still, our goal in this case is to do that, but still bring it into the fold where financial regulators are feeling comfortable around this.
Yeah, that makes a lot, because I came from the banking sector. I spent 12 years in banking, and when I went through executive banking school, we had to scale banks from the ground up in a simulation. And when I started to find out about DeFi and the cross-border payment infrastructure of blockchain, I was like, I wish I had this when I was building my banks in the simulation, because what I realized, but what got me into crypto, is I was completely against crypto about a year and a half ago because I was an ex-banker. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute. I literally can become my own bank. I literally become my own entity. And so what I'm seeing within the banking sectors is banks are, JP Morgan said it himself, or Jamie Dimon said banks are scared shitless of fintech companies and DeFi, because once people realize they can actually do their own loans, they can do their own, they can create their own liquidity. I don't think people have grasped that yet. Obviously, it's so early that they literally become their own institution. And so that's the most powerful thing that I see with DeFi coming out there, and then being the first licensed DeFi product. What does that mean, being the first licensed DeFi?
So it means that there's certain requirements in the regulatory space that actually are sort of paramount, right? One is that you basically know the counterparties, that there's an onboarding process that we've built into the smart contracts that allows us to sort of make sure that we know on behalf of the regulator who the transacting parties are, and that everyone is comfortable around this, because a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines of the institutional side, especially, that so far cannot engage, because when they do a transaction, they actually don't know who the counterparties are that they're transacting with. So from a compliance perspective, it makes it incredibly difficult for them, right? The second piece that because we are licensed, we can do is we can add new elements to the sandbox, or this Lego sandbox that DeFi is. We can bring assets in which suddenly can be leveraged against on a smart contract basis. We can onboard customers from the banking system that suddenly don't have this high hurdle of knowing what MetaMask is, but they can just log in and qualify with their bank accounts. And that's very, very powerful for all parties involved, because in the end, these markets become more efficient with more participants, and with less sort of inhibitants of what people might or might not be able to do, right? And so because we are what we are, we can do things a little differently. And in the end, we also know that there's a lot of scrutiny coming down the pike that that will actually make people need to change. And I think that we're already building the understanding by the regulators, but also building technology that allows us to already anticipate that kind of movement and just make everyone feel comfortable around this. And it's also fair to say, not everything in crypto is about crypto. Actually, blockchain technology deployed on existing assets has also value, because suddenly, and maybe it's too expensive right now, but it actually will become very inexpensive soon, where in the end, if you have, an existing, asset that has a certain market that is traded on in the financial industry, well, you could just open that up to anyone who defines the market differently. So you can suddenly have markets that are, in Thailand, built with the Thai baht, where a certain stock gets traded against that. That market today doesn't exist. maybe it should, right? But it's up to the crowd to then decide that, or the swarm. The second piece is, by making it programmable, you can then sort of make your own decision what is value adding in terms of doing something with the asset. And you talked about it. Basically, lending is an incredibly powerful tool. So what if you personally, you, Coach GV, had your own personal balance sheet and you made a decision how much you want to leverage that, and all the assets would play into that. You do your daily spending as a result of actually just lending against it, and you would decide when to pay it off. That so far doesn't exist because these are siloed financial products in the banking system. That each bank has their own siloed project, and there's products. There's very little overlap. So bringing that onto this common development, or this common programming platform, allows much more powerful things to happen.
So for me, it seems like it's decreasing the barrier to entry. Like when people come into the crypto space, brand new to the crypto space, I mean, if you got to provide liquidity, you got to go through all these different processes. So if you've never been on an app before and bought crypto and you want to get into DeFi, all of a sudden you have to go through all these processes. So what I'm hearing you say is you're helping decrease that barrier to entry, correct? That's
going to come over time. Yes, of course. And that obviously today is maybe like more difficult than it should be, but we already have had tons of progress in the space, actually making sort of KYC procedures a lot more easier, making it more powerful to do things in the back office instead of actually something that becomes evident. And sort of we, for example, we're going to be sort of already launching with a method where European bank account holders can log in and qualify with using their European bank accounts. Now, you didn't hear me say once that they need to have some kind of knowledge of MetaMask or a sort of a certain thing, because over time they won't have to. At the beginning, it will be still that requirement, but over time that's going to start to disappear. And I think the ultimate success of blockchain will happen when nobody actually realizes that blockchain is underneath it.
Yes, that's the key. When it's completely indivisible. I tell people that all the time. I'm like, when they're learning crypto, it's like, you use your phone. You don't really know all the things that how they built the apps. You're just using the apps, right? And so one thing I was going to ask you, and then I'll kick it over to Selman, is where do you see the space going in the next 5 years? Like, it's such an immature market. Where do you personally see, being in Silicon Valley and now in the crypto space, like where do you see this going in the next 5 years?
I think it's fair to say that, like, when we look at 2017, 18, 19, I think there was a lot of, confusion and Cambrian explosion of certain things happening. And I think there was a lot of catch up that, institutions and regulators had to do, and assessing what is real about it and what is necessary and how sustainable long-term that is going to be around. And I think like 2020 was a very, very big year from that perspective, because, what we saw is that there's a lot of institutions that not just took it seriously, but they sort of had this sense of inevitability, that this is not just some fad that is going to go away, but it's here to stay, and it is materially impacting the way that they do business. And so I think people don't realize in the broader retail space how big that conviction is and how many efforts are happening. And with that, there's just an entire layer of new financial market infrastructure that is being built at this point in time that is going to bring new innovation to the space, and innovation coming both from the institutional side, but also, bringing sort of blockchain technology into the fold of real money assets and how they interact with the consumer, right? I also think that there's always been this anticipation of doing more than cryptocurrency with the blockchain. And I think finally the elements have started to come together, with obviously regulation plays a huge role in this case, but I also think that there's the tangible reason for people to do more than just have the hopes and dreams built on blockchain, but actually do something real with it. And that I think will come to life very, very, very quickly. And we'll see some really big progress happening in the next 18 months on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting shift right now. I see the medical records being on blockchain, real estate being on blockchain, everything coming to that blockchain protocol. So one thing, I'll kick it over to Selman. Selman, did you have anything?
Yeah, actually, you stole my question. That was a very important question that I'd like to that I wanted to ask. So, like the blockchain technology is basically out here, like since Bitcoin is popular, and what I would like to know is, there is no hype for security tokens, and I think there is a reason for that. You're still building something like this sector is very young, still growing, but growing fast actually. But my question is, do you think like this could be the next big hype for institutions, not for retail investors maybe, but I mean the real institutions where basically the narrative changes and all of a sudden people want to tokenize their assets? Because right now, maybe you hear it too, the narrative is governments are against cryptocurrencies, and but still projects are like companies or teams are still working hard. They're not, letting them down from narratives or news. They're building something, and you basically do that too. Do you think like all of a sudden the narrative could change? Regulations will come, and all of a sudden institutions will start to tokenize their assets.
Yeah, I think like to our own fault, I think we as a industry building this thing called digital assets or security tokens, and there's been a lot of terms for this, right? I think at the beginning, the industry thought of it really in a crowdfunding way, thought of it as something where there's magic pixie dust built on top of an asset and suddenly like money flies in. And, I think the reality of that is that's obviously not true. And it takes a lot more to make, like big fundraisers happening than just, technology. Secondly, it was a question of adverse selection at some point in time, where a lot of people that didn't succeed raising funds in the real world then said, okay, well, here's this blockchain thing, and let's just try to do it differently. And then suddenly they would think that money would sort of start flowing in. Now, the way I think about the security token industry today is way different. That will exist, and that will be a category, and there will be some reason for that to exist, and especially sort of the automation methodologies of using blockchain actually will benefit that space. But what today as a real use case exists is that there's a huge demand for stablecoins, and today they're backed by crypto. Well, there's a real reason to actually have them backed by assets, because they are more stable and they just correlate much more with what the stablecoin needs to represent. So you can just almost think about like building or bringing just public assets that are part of the financial ecosystem, bridging them over into a digital asset and then backing stable coins. That already is just use case enough to just be a huge driver of transparency in the space, of stability in the space, and where we no longer have questions whether there's a fractional ownership of the dollars that are promised to be behind a stable coin. So this is just one example, but we'll see actually this whole programmability of DeFi, it actually opens up for any kind of financial products a new realm of what it can be done with it. So it's more about those use cases that will drive a lot of volume and institutional adoption, rather than the use cases around crowdfunding that we're interesting to talk about. And we all talked about banking the unbanked and making them participate in all these things. The reality is that the big volumes and the real need at this point in time is actually on a very different level.
That's interesting.
Thank you very much. And one last question. I would like to know, right now you guys are on Ethereum, on the Ethereum blockchain. Is there incentives maybe to build your own blockchain in the near future, or is a question like that on the table, or will it be on Ethereum actually?
Yeah, so it's funny because we started off actually with Swarm Network actually as a fork of Stellar on a dedicated blockchain, and it became also there evident that that was not necessary. You don't need to build like the roads in order to drive a car over it. And in this case, the work that has been done on layer one has been so interesting and so progressive that we are obviously encountering huge ecosystems of people that have adopted certain layer ones. And there's derivative work on sort of bringing the same kind of compatibility to other blockchains as well. So we started off on Ethereum, but it's a back office connected with smart contract language, and it's built on an Ethereum virtual machine. So wherever that is, we can immediately also just deploy, and there's the obvious candidates to vet there. But nothing stops us from actually connecting the same kind of procedures to other blockchains that have much more efficient infrastructure that are, but who need to be sort of institutionally accepted. So for us, the driver is less about technology and the sort of interesting pieces about it, but more about like where can we meet the customers that have certain needs, and where is sort of an acceptance into the customer base that we're targeting.
Awesome. What is so how would someone get involved in swarm markets?
So we actually literally a couple of weeks ago talked about this for the first time, and it was an incredible sort of well-received concept so far. And I think a lot of elements go into why that's the case. But yeah, so we launched a launch liquidity program that is on our website, swarm.markets, that allows people to sign up and get early access to the existing platform and then stake liquidity. There's some rewards that are going alongside with that. We actually literally today, we launched the first phase of the SMT token sale, which is the reward. It's the payment token of the platform that actually will drive the rewards beyond just normal returns. And so the economy around that is going to be incredibly exciting. There's going to be a process of like 3 weeks. We're starting on launch pool right now, and there's also information on our website. But then there's going to be a batch auction, driven on the Gnosis contracts that is going to run for 2 weeks at the end of July. And then after that, there's going to be directly sort of tradability of the token itself.
Awesome. Well, Philip, thank you. You've given us a half an hour of your time. It was such an honor to have you on board. We'd love to have you on in the future as we continue to grow our community. And we want to thank you for bringing this to us. And it's an honor to have the first licensed DeFi protocol out there. So what I'll do is for the Warriors, I'll attach the website down below so you can go look and research for yourself. Everything's on there, the white paper. So Philip, we appreciate you. Selman, thank you for hooking us up with Philip. And we just want to continue to grow in this space and continue to learn. So if we could have you back on in the future, it'd be fantastic. But Warriors, we want to continue to educate you guys on this new realm that we're heading into. The biggest key, Warriors, is I always tell you, don't trust a word I say. Don't trust a guy with a long hair and a cutoff shirt. Go out there and do your research, understand what you're looking at. But this is a very, very exciting time, Warriors. But make sure you always do your own research, understand what you're getting into. And the key is, Warriors, to always, as they're looking this way, look this way, Warriors. So we appreciate you. Thank you, Philip. And as we always say, Warriors, rise. Let's make it a great day.
Thank you.